In lesson 6.5, we're going to talk about the quadratic formula and the discriminant. Quadratic formula is a method for solving quadratics. It works all the time, and we'll get into that later here. You will be offered an opportunity for some extra credit on a test if you can derive the quadratic formula, and that is something you've talked about before, the quadratic formula. It involves completing the square, which we've just done here in this chapter. Factoring and then solving for x. Basically, deriving is coming up with what the quadratic formula is. You've seen what it is, but you start with the general form or standard form for a quadratic, which is this: ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Okay, and we're going to go through how to derive. You know, the quadratic formula has all those coefficients a, b, and c in it, and how they came up with the quadratic formula. Your first step, I'll kind of change colors each step here, is to subtract c. So here's what I have: ax squared plus bx, okay, I'm going to leave a space, is equal to negative c. Remember, when you did completing the square, you had to get the constant over the other side. That's really what we're doing here right now. C is standing for that constant. If x squared had a coefficient in front of it, or a number other than 1 in front of it, in this case it's got a, we divide everything by a. So what we want to do now is we want to divide everything by a. So we're going to divide by a, and we're going to divide by a. And you would have to show all these steps to get the points, and I think I do it for 5 points extra credit, give or take a few points. So you'd have x squared plus, and we're going to write this as b over a times x is equal to negative c over a. Now, if you remember, completing the square, you look at this value right here, which is b over a, and you take half of it. So off to the side, I'm going to do that. I have b over a, which is the thing in front of the x to the first term. I'm going to take half of it. If it's a fraction, I'm going to multiply it by a half. And if I do that, b times 1 is b, a times 2 is 2a. So half of b over a is b over 2a. And then you take this, and we're going to square it. This is the steps in completing the square. So I'm going to do b over 2a squared. We've just reviewed all these rules, so I square the top, that's b squared. I square the bottom. If I square 2a times 2a, I got to square the 2, that's 4. Square the a, so it's 4a squared. So now what I want to do is that's what I have to add to both sides. So that's going to go there, and it's going to go over here. So I'm going to have plus b squared over 4a squared, and plus b squared over 4a squared. Now, if you remember in completing the square, which is in the last section, you wrote this side as a binomial squared. And what went in there was always the x, because it's x squared, and then whatever we squared to get what we added to both sides. So this right here is what I squared. Okay, so it's plus b over 2a. That's what goes in there. On the other side, I'm looking at adding these. In order to add algebraic fractions, we need a common denominator. So if I do negative c over a plus b squared over 4a squared, and we'll get a lot more into algebraic fractions in a future unit next quarter, but my common denominator would be 4a squared. If you notice, there's my common denominator. I would have to multiply a by 4a to get it. So I'd have negative 4ac plus b squared. And I'm going to actually write that as b squared minus 4ac. I'm taking this top. I'm going to put the b squared first. And this should start looking familiar into what the quadratic formula is. All over 4a squared. So I just found a common denominator there. So if I go further here, I take the square root of both sides now. So that leaves me with what's inside parentheses, just like in completing the square, x plus b over 2a. On the top, I'm going to leave the square root of b squared minus 4ac. On the bottom, this really means the square root of 4a squared. Well, I can take that. That's a perfect square. That's 2a. So that's 2a. If you notice, it's starting to look like the quadratic formula. And we have positive and negative. Remember, every time you take the square root, you need the positive and negative symbol. Well, now, how would I get x alone? I would have to subtract whatever this is. So subtract b over 2a. I'm going to subtract b over 2a, and I'm going to put it in front of that positive and negative or plus minus symbol. So it's negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And then at the end, we're going to write it. We already have a common denominator. So it's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. For the extra credit, you would have to show every single step that I just showed you right there for deriving the quadratic formula.